Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Palm Sunday. It's the Sunday before Holy Week, or for many of us, the start of Holy Week as of today, heading towards Easter through the events of the last week of Jesus' life, which are told in great detail in the Gospels. A significant proportion of each of the Gospels is dedicated to just this week in Jesus' life. There are all kinds of events and conversations and things that happen that lead us from here into Easter. And so today we begin that journey really towards Easter through Holy Week. And we begin with a deliberate choice that Jesus makes. Jesus enters Jerusalem, having ministered and spoken and acted on the outskirts, in the villages and towns surrounding. Jesus makes a deliberate choice to enter into the city. He enters into the place of political and religious power. He enters into a place where he is a problem for all of those structures in all kinds of ways, and things have to come to a head, and he has to know that this will cost him his life. He has to know that. It's obvious that the religious and political leaders of the day have decided that they have to do something about him. They have to be rid of him somehow, or at least majorly discredit him. But killing him solves all of those problems. And instead of him waiting for them to come to him, he decides to go to them and begins a very powerful, very intense, very dramatic week of his life, and one that we'll spend some time with each day between now and Easter Sunday. I guess the question this morning, as I think about Palm Sunday, is why Jesus makes that choice. Why he decides to go to the place where he is most vulnerable and most in danger. And I guess it calls into question or asks us to think about our ideas about Easter as a whole, about what it means for Jesus to die on the cross, and then for us to believe in a physical resurrection. No matter how many questions we may have about those things, to believe that somehow that is the crux of our faith, and that unlocks something of God's presence in our lives. We need to start with the choice to go in. And that choice is clearly not an easy choice. It's not a convenient choice. I'm not sure it's a foregone conclusion that Jesus will simply follow this path. In the course of this week, we'll spend a bit of time with the idea of why Jesus dies, and what purpose that serves, and what difference that makes, and to what extent that is potentially scripted by God in some way as a means of unlocking God's love for us. Lots of questions about that. But I wanted to begin this morning by looking at the deliberate choice that Jesus makes to go into Jerusalem, which essentially is about choosing goodness, choosing to do the good thing, the loving thing, the consistent thing with regards to the whole of his life and all the things he's spoken. There's a program called, let me just find it, Beyond Belief on Radio 4, which airs on an evening or an afternoon, and you can find it on the BBC Sounds website. There was one I listened to a while ago. I listened to half of it. I need to listen to the other half again because I have heard it before. It's quite an old episode, but it was rebroadcast. And it deals with the idea of original sin. This idea that somehow we are all, from birth, we are all tainted, or I guess if you want to use the strongest language of some bits of the Christian church, we are essentially evil. We are essentially bad. We are not unlovable, but God cannot come close to us because there's something about us that keeps God from coming to us. And that is our consistent choice to be selfish, to be the opposite of good in whatever way we understand goodness. Bad seems like a very sort of two-dimensional word for all of the complexity of humans' ability to choose against what would be the best thing for them or for others in a given moment. But essentially, and some theologians and scholars through the centuries have understood that in different ways. John Calvin, often over-egged in the way that he is represented, talked about utter depravity, that essentially there is nothing good in any of us. That anything good in any of us, any decision that is ever positive or loving or creative, is essentially a spark of what is already within us that God has placed there. Others more gently talking about original sin, not as something handed down from even the mythology of Adam and Eve, that from that moment we became utterly depraved and in desperate need of God's continuing intervention in our lives, morally, socially, in every way, for us to behave well in any way. That for some, we want to say that. We want to say in parts of the church, we go back that far, and original sin it's about the apple, or I don't know, I quite like apples. I've always thought it was, I don't know, whatever was your least favorite fruit. That's what Adam and Eve had. and that somehow in transmitting or transferring or inheriting that sin, all of us are damned. All of us are damned is the right word. We are damned. We'll ask damned to what at some other point, because ideas about heaven and hell are also something to just treat carefully, and not just receive as the simple wisdom or message of a happy place full of love and joy and everything being great, and an awful place where you know how bad you've been and you know that for the rest of eternity, and you might think that there seriously is some fire and some red dudes poking you with some pointy things. I don't know, and I'm not making fun of that at all, but it's worth thinking about. In that episode of Beyond Belief, a number of people talk about the idea of original sin and the way in which it is somehow attractive in some ways, but also problematic for us. And that original sin has been understood in different ways through different times. Not necessarily as something that was about depravity, but as about a heart essentially orientated towards selfishness and towards calculated love rather than generous love and free love. Calculated love in that self-interest is always at play. Always and everywhere at play. And there's a quite funny episode of Friends about whether anyone ever does anything just because it's good to do. So Jesus enters Jerusalem, and he enters Jerusalem either because somehow that's part of some grand plan to unlock the prison gates of this original sin that all of us find ourselves in, or Jesus enters Jerusalem because he chooses to do so as an act of ultimate love and sacrifice and consistency and integrity. That for Jesus not to confront those in the ways that he does, confront those who represent power in faith and in politics in ways that are corrupt and distorted, Jesus would not be true to himself. And God must be true to God. God is who God is. God acts as God acts. And God loves as God loves. And so Jesus makes this choice. It sounds like it should be effortless, but it clearly isn't. And again, we live with the mystery in this week as again of how God gets to be contracted into a human lifespan in the person of Jesus, present in a particular moment, and living with I don't want to say the competing natures of God and man, unless you do the original sin thing, but then Jesus doesn't count, and virgin birth comes in, and all of that stuff, which again we will talk about at some point. but that Jesus is limited in Scripture. Jesus says things that show enormous insight, but at the same time Jesus says things that show limitation, and emotion and fear and love and longing and frustration and many, many things that are common to us. But Jesus makes the choice. He makes the choice. He chooses to honor the best in himself. He chooses to act out of the best in himself. He chooses to live with the consequences of the best in himself. And the best in himself is to choose to enter Jerusalem in humility, fated by the crowd, loved by the crowd, adored by the crowd, but himself probably deeply conflicted, deeply lonely on that donkey, and wondering just how it will end for him. So today, Palm Sunday, we begin Holy Week with a deep mystery as to the nature of God and to the nature of our own lives. We can talk about this fruitfully. We can unpack it and explore it and ask how our ideas form some coherence, because just simple ideas about original sin and Jesus dying on the cross to somehow break open the possibility of God's love, and we can write the equation easily and just let that rest. But of course, the challenge for us always is to find ourselves in the story. And the challenge for us in this time of coronavirus, I keep saying it, this time of coronavirus, but in this deeply unusual and disturbing and opportunity-rich moment for us, while some people fight for their lives and others fight to keep them alive, most of us have the freedom to be quiet and still and at least unbusy practically in our lives, simple in our lives. The question for us of whether we see ourselves as fundamentally good or perhaps fundamentally flawed, or both, is an important question. Why do you think, if you're listening to this and if faith is part of your life, why do you think Jesus goes into Jerusalem? Why do you think he's there? And what is it that he is honoring in himself as God and as a human being that drives that choice? It's a fascinating question, and it isn't an easy one to answer, because it's essentially a question that asks of each of us how we are honoring ourselves and honoring the God that is within us as much as we feel able to in the choices we make about how we go about loving and what we step into and what we step away from and where things become too difficult for us. I did say yesterday that God doesn't have great expectations of us, and I do believe that. I do think, though, and I'm absolutely clear, that needs to be balanced by the implications of God's love and the example of Jesus. That while God doesn't come to us with a sort of preset expectation that we will lay down our lives and suffer for love, that has to come in some ways when we choose to put on the love of God and we choose to honor what the love of God really feels like and how it is offered to us in Jesus, and what that might mean for us in the way we go about making tough choices in a regular way. So have a listen to Beyond Belief. The episode's just called Original Sin. If you just Google search for Beyond Belief and Original Sin, you'll find the episode. It's half an hour. It's a really interesting exploring of what that idea gives to us and takes away from us in understanding ourselves. It's a really, really good half hour that might even be more fruitful than these 15-20 minutes that you listen to me. So let's begin. Let's begin towards Jerusalem. Or towards the cross. Let's go with Jesus on the donkey. Let's recognize that we are in the crowds often who are saying, "Yay, you've come to fix everything. Woohoo! We love you." Although we might like to think of ourselves as amongst the faithful disciples following on, although for them it ends in running away. How do you begin this Holy Week? I would normally, now it's 20 to 9, I would be at church, I would be greeting people, I'd be handing out palm crosses, I'd be preparing for a service this morning at 9 o'clock. I'd then be going on to Central Methodist Church and joining my colleague Judith for Bread Church, baking bread and having conversation with a number of people who come to that, a small number, but who are deeply vulnerable and doing some realness in the midst of kneading dough and baking bread and having good conversation. But I won't be at either of those places today, and I will miss those who would have been there with me. And I want to wish you all a good Holy Week. In the same way that we say Good Friday is Good Friday because of what it symbolizes for us. Saying have a good Holy Week is not saying have an easy Holy Week or have a clear Holy Week or a Holy Week without questions or some great experience of God and faith and love and some deep conviction about what the rest of your life should look and feel like. Maybe that will happen. If it does, that would be wonderful. But for most of us, it probably won't. And so the invitation, the gift, the hope and the prayer for me, for you, for each of you, however much faith you do or don't have, and however much there really is beyond what you think and feel about yourself. I hope that you have a good week. A good week. We've got some big things to wrestle with this week. Some big themes and some big ideas and some really fundamental things in understanding how faith in God and the person of Jesus is a good thing for us. Not just a sort of preventative insurance policy or some kind of moral compass, but fundamentally about our freedom and our ability to grow and become the people that we already are and can yet be, in love and in grace and in all the things that are the essentials, are the basics, are the foundations of a good life, even if not an easy life. So bless you. Have a good day. The sun is shining. I think we're going to have a barbecue for lunch. I will be sending an email to the church this morning. Should have come yesterday, but I wasn't able to send that for a number of reasons. I'll be sending an email in a little while with some invitations to a sort of daily reflection in partnership with Pinelands Methodist Church in Cape Town, where we have relationship. Some things from me, some instructions about how to make a cross out of a palm or a piece of paper or anything you like, really, if you want to do some crafting today, and have that somewhere, or stick it up in a window, or do whatever you want to do with it. And some opportunities that will emerge through the week for us to use Zoom, which is a conferencing software, for as many of us as can, to just gather briefly each day in the quiet of late afternoon or early evening, and share a little bit about our journey through Holy Week. So loving God, would you help us to start Holy Week well? Would you help us to wrestle with the idea of the good and the bad within us? Would you help us to make sense, as much as we can, just today, of all that it means to be capable of love and learning to love, and capable of forgiveness and learning to forgive, and capable of the opposite of love, of resentment and judgment, and even taking pleasure at the discomfort or the pain of others. Those are strong words, but they sometimes apply. Would you help us to do that? Would you help us to know what to do with the place that we find ourselves in the crowd as you enter into Jerusalem, to be who you are and to love what you love and to face what you must face because of love. So bless us in the sunshine, in our eating and drinking, our praying and reflecting, our being with people who we care about today, whether they're in the house or on a screen or the end of a phone. Help us to journey well through today and to arrive well into tomorrow. Amen.